Hello and welcome back. It is that time of year again. We have an upcoming B&R announcement, so I'm going to take a minute to share my thoughts on the legacy format and my hopes and predictions for what WotC is going to do for the format in this upcoming B&R. I'll be honest, I didn't know if I was going to make this video. There was no changes at the last B&R announcement back in June, much to everyone in the format's dismay, and the meta hasn't greatly changed since before that B&R, so there's not a lot to really go into in depth because the format is honestly largely just the same that it was before. The meta is still just absolutely dominated by various forms of tempo. Dimir Reanimator, is it Delver, is it Cutter, Dimir Tempo. Yes, Dimir Reanimator is a tempo deck. I will die on that hill. Feel free to argue with me in the comments. I'm always willing to debate it, and I am sure I will love some of the reactions I get out of my arguments. But regardless, the majority of the format is still these blue based tempo decks that are just swapping out various finisher packages, whether it's the Reanimator combo, Corey Steel Cutter, or Goyfs and Bowmasters in the form of Dimir Tempo. And Dimir Reanimator specifically is still the most played deck in the format by a huge margin. Its meta share has dropped a little bit since June, but it's still sitting around 16% at the time of this recording and is twice the next played deck according to the MTG Goldfish meta page, which is it Delver at about 8%. So you're still talking the top two decks of the format, which are both blue based tempo decks, are still taking up about a quarter of the format on their own, not including any of the other color variants that appear further down on the page. The rest of the top 10 decks at the top of the meta is largely the same as well. You see a good representation of combo in the form of Mystic Forge, Cephalid Breakfast, Painter, a little bit of Oops All Spells, and a little bit of Sneak and Show, and then two Stompy decks in the form of Eldrazi and Red Stompy, which have been rising up in the ranks lately. But overall, the meta itself is pretty much unchanged. Looking into some of these numbers, the only real notable changes that you can see are that the Izzet and Dimir tempo decks have kind of swapped the representation. Prior to June, Dimir Tempo was the premier non-reanimator tempo deck, and Izzet Delver was further down the line. But more people have been adapting the Corey Steel Cutter tech and wanting the range that Lightning Bolt gives, so that the Izzet Delver version has actually surpassed Dimir Tempo. So those two kind of flip flopped, and we have seen an increase in the overall amount of Stompy decks, seeing Mystic Forge rise up to be a real meta contender and even put three decks in the top eight of Eternal Weekend North America. We're also seeing a lot of Eldrazi and Red Stompy going around as well, as they're just super fast aggro decks that can keep up with the Dimir Reanimator deck and try to tax its life total so that it can't pull off the Oops I Win Reanimator button and try to get in before they can really get the hooks in with the tempo elements of the deck. So it's not super surprising to see some Stompy decks rising up just to be able to specifically combat these tempo decks. But outside of that, as I said, it's not a whole lot has changed. A couple of other random combo decks in here that are able to go fast but are also resilient. And then one thing also of note is that Oops All Spells has dropped its metagame percentage almost in half. Prior to the last B&R announcement, a lot of people were saying they need to ban Oops All Spells completely out of the format. A lot of people didn't agree with my assessment of it, where Oops All Spells is not a problem in and of itself. Its metagame percentage and its win rates are not problematic. It's a deck that can be interacted with on multiple axes. It's just a miserable play experience. And we are kind of seeing the one major shift in the meta being that Oops All Spells is falling out of favor as people are starting to see that. Even in Eternal Weekend, it didn't have any crazy numbers or anything. And the fact that it's falling out of the metagame as people are realizing, like, okay, yes, it's super fast and it's a glass cannon and it's a good way to get in under some of these tempo decks if they don't have the interaction. It's just not a reliable enough strategy to be able to consistently beat it over a larger data set. So I feel a little personally vindicated seeing that Oops All Spells is slowly dropping down the metagame chart and that the deck really isn't problematic. It's just a miserable play experience from both sides of the table. But on all metrics, oops, is not a problem, and we're kind of starting to see that pan out in the metagame. Getting into what actually is a problem in the metagame, flipping over from the deck meta into the most played cards of the meta, that's where you really see where the issues are outside of just tempo completely dominating the top of the metagame page. The overall top played cards are basically the blue based tempo decks. You've got your Force of Will, Brainstorm, Ponder, Force of Negation, Consigned to Memory, Tameo, Daze. You've got Fairy Macabre, which is a sideboard card in all of them. You've got Thoughtseize, which is very prominent in the Dimir version. And then you do have Lotus Petal down there, but that's because it just slots into all of the Stompy decks that are at the top of the format to be able to power them out. The really telling thing is if you look at the top creatures outside of Fairy Macabre, which is the number one played creature, but I'm disregarding that because barely anyone ever casts it. That's honestly just graveyard hate. Tameo is the number one played creature at 38% of decks are playing it. And then every other creature in the top 10, other than Simian Spirit Guide, falls into, again, the blue-based tempo decks. Brazen Borrower, Murktide Regent, Atraxa, Archon of Cruelty, Orcish Bowmasters. This is basically just the Dimir Reanimator and Dimir Tempo deck in and of itself for the most part. So you're just seeing that these blue-based tempo cards are just absolutely dominating the top of the meta. And Tameo Inquisitive Student in particular, if you are in blue, you are playing that card. That card single-handedly shapes the format in and of itself. So many games are now turning into situations where the game is about Tameo, whether it's slowly accruing you card advantage through the clues that it produces on the front side, or when it flips to the back side, trying to deal with it before it ultimates and your opponent draws half of the deck and essentially can't lose from that point, or even it being able to nerf or nuke small creature decks that rely on these small creatures to go wide, getting the debuff from its positive, completely invalidating them, or even just grabbing key cards back from the graveyard to be able to use them again. So many games come down to, does Tameo resolve, and do you have a way to deal with either the front or the backside before it in and itself can take over the game? A lot of these blue tempo deck games turn into, am I going to do the aggro plan or am I going to do the Tameo plan? And both of them win games in and of themselves and require different kinds of interaction to be able to actually effectively deal with it. So if we're looking at any new problems, so to speak, in Legacy that weren't brazenly apparent back before the June BNR, Tameo has really made itself known as an issue for the format. There were jokes all the time about Deathrite Shaman being a one-mana planeswalker because it could do so many things, and that was a problematic thing for the format and led to Deathrite Shaman being banned. Tameo is literally a one-mana planeswalker that does so much more than Deathrite Shaman does. So it is nice seeing that people are starting to realize that Tameo is a problem, but there's still a lot of hesitation of people to ban it, even though it just defines the current meta and the format and is clearly a problematic card and needs to be addressed. Continuing down the thought of problematic cards that are not showing up in the most played overall lists here on MTG Goldfish, there are a few that I have pointed out before that I feel are problematic, and quite a few other people do as well, that I feel need to be addressed. Nadu was a big one that I pointed out. While I don't think power level wise it is too much for Legacy, the play patterns that it creates and the theoretical logistical issues that it creates really make it too much for the format. In my opinion, it's better off being gone. We saw during Eternal Week in North America, a ton of people were playing Nadu as they realized that it is a very powerful thing to do. It is very consistent, and a lot of the times, even though the game's not actually over the minute you get Nadu and Nomads and Core on the battlefield, it's virtually over. You're not going to be able to catch back up to the card advantage that it creates. It's just going to end the game very slowly after that if you don't just scoop. and a lot of people have taken to the habit of just scooping to it. We also saw the same problem that we saw with Nadu in Modern play out in Legacy, where it was much more highly represented in paper because it's just logistically easier and more efficient to show those play patterns in paper than online due to the user interface on MTGO. So while the online data doesn't show the full picture of Nadu and how problematic it is, we saw at Eternal Week in North America that it is a very powerful deck and more people would be playing it if the user interface on MTGO wasn't so bad for the style of gameplay that it produces. And while its numbers weren't insane, it still showed it is an extremely powerful card and that the play patterns are just absolutely dominating if it can get on the battlefield. Stick around and you have the enabler, and it just leads to these long turns with tons of Nadu triggers to be able to basically draw your whole deck. And a lot of these decks are also playing endurance in them, so that you can discard a bunch of cards on your end step, loop them back into your deck, and just keep going and going. It just leads to absolutely long, miserable games of just your opponent cycling through their deck a bunch of times with Nadu, and even though you're not actually dead, you don't realistically have a way to get back into the game. And online or in an FNM, just scoop, move on with your time. Your time is more important. But in high stakes tournaments like Eternal Weekend, if you're playing in a challenge or something, the objectively correct thing to do is make your Nadu opponent go through the motions until you actually are definitively dead. So at a high stakes level, it is very problematic from a logistical standpoint, even though you don't really see that much in the content that you see, because a lot of people are just scooping to it because we're playing against it in low stakes environments. But I still stand by the fact that I think Nadu needs to go. Other cards that people are saying are problematic, I've been seeing a lot of discourse about the One Ring in the Stompy decks. I'm still on the fence about the One Ring. It is a very powerful card advantage engine, but it has a legitimate downside by you losing life equal to the number of counters. And when you really pop off with it, typically it's in the Mystic Forge combo decks that are basically just going to go off that turn anyway, so it really doesn't matter. It's just like any other combo piece. Where it really has an issue, I think, is how it digs for itself, and it's a repeatable fog. I'm not a fan of advocating for restrictions in Legacy instead of outright bans, but that is a suggestion I've heard, and it also fits flavorfully. There's One Ring, but I'm still not quite there to say that it needs to be banned. There's still a lot of counterplay to it. You can needle it, you can no rot it, you can punish the card draw effect with Orcish Bowmasters. So while it is a very powerful card, I'm not necessarily of the mindset that it needs to be banned out of the format yet. As far as other cards are concerned that people are saying need to be banned out of the format that I'm not 100% on board with yet, there's still all the talk of Entomb or Reanimate needing to be banned out of the format because of the Dimir Reanimator deck. I'm not going to go into my full rant about this because I already went into it in depth in my last video, but I still stand by my assessment. Entomb does not need to be banned. The Reanimator side of the Dimir Reanimator deck is not the problem, and there would be so much collateral damage banning Entomb that just to nuke one of the potential finisher packages in these tempo decks isn't justification enough to basically ban a ton of other perfectly reasonable strategies that rely on Entomb to function. So I won't go into my whole spiel about that, but I still stand that Entomb doesn't need to be banned. It's fine in the format. Other things are the issue in the deck that has Entomb that is causing problems. So I think Entomb still should not be touched, even though I know it's an unpopular opinion. Going on down my list of cards that I think are problematic in the format, I still stand by I think Kozilek's Command is kind of an egregious card. Again, I won't go into great depth about my reasoning because I've already gone into it previously and I still feel the same. But a big part of that is just it nullifies most of the interaction that would be able to hamper the Mystic Forge and Artifact combo decks that are really the ones that are truly abusing that card. It just nullifies all of your artifact hate because they just slam a glaring flesh raker and then with all their soul lands they just burn you out even though the rest of their deck is completely unfunctional if you have something like a collector roof or a null rod on the battlefield. I have heard some people talking about possibly hitting those decks a little bit differently than going after Kozilek's command and potentially actually banning one of the keys that really allow those decks to go off. And I think that's an interesting thought, but it doesn't really solve the problem that I just said. The keys are still weak to artifact hate, and what really pushes those decks over the edge is the fact that they have a way to just completely ignore artifact hate and still just kill you out of nowhere. So I still think Kozilek's Command might actually be the card that's kind of pushing those decks a little bit over the edge. But that's just my opinion. There are a couple of different ways we could think about attacking some of those artifact combo decks, but I do think Kozilek's Command is a bit too far, and that would be my pick for trying to nerf any of those. Outside of that, I mean, the meta hasn't changed. There's really not a whole lot to say. It's still kind of the same problematic cards that were issues before the BNR announcement in June. The only real difference I can say is just Tameo has become more of an evident problem than it was before. So I think that would probably be a good place to start. And if I had my way, I would love to see Tameo, Kozilek's Command, and Nadu banned out of the format. That said, I honestly think Watsy's going to give us a Tameo ban and nothing else. Just another attempt to nerf the Dimir Reanimator deck and tangentially nerf some of the other blue tempo decks without fully nuking them out. I do think that it will be another meaningful nerf, but I don't think it's going to be enough to truly stop the tempo deck's reigns in the format. The other equally likely option is they just give us another no changes. It's pretty obvious WotC doesn't seem to really care about the legacy format that much. If they did, they wouldn't perpetually be 1 to 2 ban cycles behind the issues. The player base has a really good track record of pointing out issues and cards that need to be banned, and then WotC not banning them until at least one more ban cycle after that. We have proof of that with Grief, Troll, Psychic Frog, and I have a feeling it's probably going to be that way with Tameo if they ban anything at all. Overall, there really isn't a whole lot to say about the format at the moment. It's the same format it's been more or less since prior to the last BNR announcement. There's been a little bit of shifting around of decks at the top of the meta, but it's largely the same decks, just in different orders. The meta is still just completely dominated by blue-based tempo decks, just with various flavors of finisher. You got some Stompy up there trying to race them and go bigger than them, and then you got some combo trying to race them and attack on enough accesses that the tempo decks can't answer all of them. But at the end of the day, there really isn't much to say. It's virtually the same meta, and I really don't have faith in WotC that they're going to do anything meaningful to change that. Final prediction is we're going to get a Tameo ban and a couple of cards thrown on the watch list. I have a feeling you'll see the One Ring, you'll see something out of the Entomb Reanimate package, and you'll see Nadu, but they're highly unlikely to act on any of those things. So, the one thing I do want to drive home, and I know I continually say this, but it is true, Legacy deserves the same attention as any of the other formats that WotC manages, whether it's Modern or Standard or Commander. Legacy is not a dead format. Despite all the hurdles thrown at us from lack of competitive support and the financial issues in paper with the reserve list, Legacy is still a alive and thriving format in the hands of the community, with all of the content creators, all of the community driven events to make up for the lack of WotC organized events outside of the Eternal Weekends. Legacy is not dead, and it deserves the attention that any other format gets. But I'll hop off of my soapbox on that one, but let me know what you all think of the Legacy format down in the comments below. Let me know what you think WotC will do, what you hope WotC will do, and what you plan on doing if the meta does change. Anyways, hope you all had as much fun watching as I did ranting about the Legacy format. I'll catch you all in the next video. And as always, stay salty. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you like what you saw. If you did, do me a favor, hit that like and sub button below. There are free ways to support the channel. And drop a comment, let me know what you like. Any kind of feedback you got, your opinions on my gameplay, the decks that I play, any of that kind of stuff. If you really like what you see, go ahead and drop by the Patreon. Become a patron, get to read some of my tournament reports and some stuff going on outside of just Magic in my life that I'm going to start putting over there as kind of my own personal blog. Also, you can do donation deck lists over there, just the price of a league if you have a specific deck you want to see, or you have an idea you want me to brew around, something like that, go ahead and do that. Nothing is required. It's always appreciated, though. Any donations go directly back into the channel, covering stuff such as leagues for donation decks or the rental program that I'm a part of. I am a small-time YouTuber. I'm doing this for fun. I really hope you all like what you saw. I truly appreciate you all stopping by. I will catch you all in the next video, and as always, stay salty.